Salamat po. So, bukas na po ang ating discussion. Tinatawagan po natin si Director Danny Sagaran para mag-share din ng kanyang thoughts on this short storytelling that we have tonight.
Good evening, everyone, and Assalamualaikum. Thank you very much for inviting me tonight's episode of Hangkabasu Kahawa. I am very thankful to Binmar for opening the topic to me, and I immediately volunteered to join this talk. Binmar and Professor Neldy are compatriots in the federalism movement, and things like or topics like this are related to our advocacy and our effort to make the Philippines and the rest of the archipelago in Sulu to become more progressive and peaceful. I was about 9 years old then in Holo, Sulu, and I can relate my experience from the minute the war started up to the time we left Holo to Zamboanga City. I have been keeping this emotion, and every 7th of February of each year, that wound is being refreshed because of the anxiety and the brutality we have passed through the war of Inholo. As a matter of fact, I told Binmar, if we title our first episode as The Burning of Holo, that is an underestimation of the tragedy that we felt Holo on September 7. It's not just about burning. It's tragedy. It was a catastrophe. It was a destruction. And along the way, you will realize in my narration of the event and find the basis and the answer on the question of who burned Holo. I have I am an eyewitness through the events. On the first day up to after 1 month, I am an eyewitness as a child. I belong to a staunch Christian family in Holoden, and we experience how as Christians we were treated kindly by non-Christians. If I have to relate to you, it would be a long story, which I am also tempted to write about my experience on that tragic day. Will you allow me to narrate my experience?
Go ahead, Sir Danny.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. On at about early morning of February 7, a relative came banging at the door of our rented apartment in Holo. Our rented apartment was located right in the center, in the heart of Holo. He came hurriedly banging the door of our apartment, telling us to leave everything and evacuate immediately because rebel forces was just a few meters away from our residence. The rebel forces were already amassed about less than half a kilometer from our apartment. So, without any delay, without bringing our precious property, except for clothes and a few pesos in our pockets, we left our apartment. We do not know where to go, to escape, to evacuate. But my late father, who was a veteran of the Second World War, has some military strategies. So we went along the deserted street early morning of February 7. We traversed the deserted streets of Holo, and we realized that we were the few who were not able to evacuate earlier. We traversed the deserted streets without any plan or strategy where to go. But my father led the way. He went to the public market, leading us to the public market with my grandmother, who was about 80 years old, limping along the way, being dragged by my mother. So we went through, sneaking our way through the market stalls, which was already being occupied by rebel forces. And we thank the rebel forces telling us not to proceed to the warp of Holo because there were already planted landmines along the way. They told us not to proceed to the warp, which was the target of my father. Then, since we were already told not to proceed to the warp because along the way, landmines were already planted by the rebels, we were directed to turn left to the public market, which was already occupied by the rebels. And kindly, they led us the way to safer space, to safer place. They told us to go to a mosque located in Cervantes Street. We stayed there. We were the only Christian family because there were a lot of Muslim evacuees already stationed in the market, in the mosque. In the morning, the following morning, around 6 or 7 o'clock, we saw a cargo plane from the military. As a child, I wondered, I was astonished why policemen should be shooting at the plane. So I realized later that the policemen, maybe that is not that uh, uh, telling the story about the policemen is not necessary, but that is what happened. What happened? Why the policemen should be shooting at a government plane? My father then commanded a pump boat where we could traverse the sea from that Cervantes Mosque to Lambayong Beach, in order to reach the house of his friend where we could take shelter. So he rented a boat, a pump boat, which brought us, and we waded shore at Lambayong Beach and went directly to the house of a certain Dr. Villanueva, who was the friend of my father, my late father. We stayed in his house for about 2 nights. On the third day, we were the residence of Dr. Villanueva was forcibly opened. I could no longer exactly remember, was it the rebel forces or the military. But one of those taken, from the house was my brother, my elder brother, who was made as human shield by the military or by the rebel forces. I could not exactly remember who took them as human shields. Then a few hours later, they were returned to the house. Then we proceeded to Litayon Beach, farther, farther from the farther from downtown Holo. We reached the Litayon Beach at past noon. Litayon Beach was a shelter for fishermen where they dried their fish catch. On the first night, young as 9 years old, and my brother, younger brother, was 7 years old, we would witness two naval boats bombarding Holo, bombarding the town of Holo. Two naval boats. And we saw how Holo was destroyed by the bombardment. Then the following morning, while we were playing at the seashore of Litayon Beach, we saw two fighter planes of the Philippine Air Force, the mightiest air force in Southeast Asia at that time, hovering over the sky and diving towards the town of Polo while unleashing the bombs they carried. Again, we saw thick smoke billowing after the bombs landed on the town of Polo. Thick smoke. So it was not to me, in my opinion, the fire, the bombs, the destruction, or the bombs caused the fire and caused the destruction. The bomb from the naval boats and the bomb from the jet planes caused the destruction. So after about 2 days in Litayon Beach, we went back because our attempt was to evacuate, to leave Holo and go to Zamboanga. When after 2 days in Litayon, we were able to take shelter in an abandoned house in Busbus, which is a barangay located on the shoreline of Holo. Imagine at night time, amidst the howling of the dogs, of stray dogs, we would realize that there were dead bodies washed ashore underneath our house. Dead bodies. Then, after a few days staying at that house, we again traversed the street littered with dead bodies until we reached the port of Holo to be able to take a ride with the boat of the Navy and a civilian commercial boat. While we were waiting for the go signal to take the boat, to take the ride, we were standing by on the port, littered with dead bodies. It was a tragic scenery, a tragic memory to us. when we were able to take the boat, a civilian boat, commercial boat, JQ Bob, the name was JQ Bob. The sea was rough, very rough. My father even told us we might be able to escape the carnage in Holo, but we might not be able to escape the anger of the sea. But God, by the will of God, we were able to reach Zamboanga City safely. When we returned to Holo after about a month, the first thing we did was to visit our home. When we arrived, our apartment was totally damaged, totally destroyed. Maybe one of the bombs, one of the cannons destroyed our residence. That is my brief account of the tragedy of Holo. I cannot describe in words my experience because along the way, I have been dealing with numbers as an auditor of the government. So my language is limited to the numbers. That's why I cannot completely describe my experience. But if I am asked to tell and retell my experience, I can still vividly narrate the events. You know, every year for 11 months, I am at peace with my memory. But every time the 7th of February takes place, the wounds of 1974 are refreshed. The anger, the passion is refreshed because the wound is permanently inscribed in my heart. And really, war is brutal and cruel. But in war, the humanity in people, the kindness in people are resurfaced. Because who would expect at that moment in time, the Muslims were treating us the kindest way they could. Imagine, we were the only Christian family in the throng of evacuees there in that mosque. But they were too kind. And even the rebel forces showed kindness when they led us to safer grounds. I'm getting emotional. Maybe I just could continue later contributing my experience. Along the way, we could casually talk about the events that unfolded in Holo based on my experience. Thank you for allowing me to share my experience. Thank you very much.
Thank thank you. Thank you for that, uh, Director Danny. May tatlo pa po kasi tayong nakaparada na ano, pagkatapos po nitong tatlo ay ipa-prioritize natin.